If you're so capable, then pay the bills yourself. My mother's voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp. So sharp that the cramped apartment in Cleveland felt like it was split in two by that single sentence. I was still wearing my full uniform after a double shift. The shirt was stained with faint oil marks, the smell of metal and hot grease still clinging to the sleeves. My feet throbbed from standing for nearly 10 hours. I hadn't even taken off my shoes when my mother slammed a stack of papers onto the kitchen table thud, as if all of it were my fault. The red numbers jumped out, burning my eyes. Overdue. She didn't ask how my day was. She didn't ask whether I'd eaten. She just stood there with her arms crossed, her gaze cold, as if I were the reason her life had hit a dead end. I already paid 2 of them, I said quietly, my eyes never leaving the paper. My mother let out a dry laugh. Then pay the rest. You're educated. You're so independent. You're an adult now. She stepped closer until there was only one step between us. Prove it. Pay your bills yourself. Something inside me clicked, not loudly, not dramatically. Just a very small click, like a switch being turned off. For years, I had studied and worked at the same time, sending money home out of habit. I always believed that if I tried just a little harder, everything would be fine. But that night, the familiar guilt didn't come. In its place was a cold, unsettling clarity. I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I went into my room, grabbed my old backpack, stuffed in a few changes of clothes, my laptop, and the only photo I had of me and my father, the one thing he left behind before he left this world. My hands were shaking, but my mind had never been clearer. My mother followed me into the hallway. Where do you think you're going? I stopped, without turning around. You just told me to handle everything on my own, I said softly. So I'm going to live my life. I walked out the door, and for the first time, I didn't look back. 1 month later, my phone lit up in the middle of the night. My mother's name flashed on the screen. When I answered, her voice was panicked, almost suffocating. Why is the house completely dark? What did you do? I took a deep breath, because I knew that was only the first bill coming due. Before I tell you what happened after that call, tell me where you're watching this video from, and what time it is for you. Now, let me tell you what truly began that night. 1 month later, my phone lit up. 1 month had passed since the night I walked out of that old apartment. I was crashing on Lena's worn sofa, in a small room that barely had space for a desk lamp and the smell of cold coffee. I had just finished folding my uniform when my phone vibrated, a cold blue light spilling across the ceiling. My mother's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a few seconds. No racing heart, no panic, just a very straight, quiet pause. Then I answered, Hannah. My mother's voice broke immediately. Where are you? What have you done? I leaned back against the sofa, pulling the blanket higher. Outside the window, a thin layer of snow covered the steps. The streets of Cleveland so quiet I could clearly hear the heating pipes clicking. What's going on? Mom, I asked, my voice steady. On the other end of the line, she was breathing fast, as if she had been running through the dark. The house is pitch black, my mother almost shouted. The power's been cut. The fridge is ruined. All the food has gone bad. Do you know about this? I closed my eyes. In my mind, the old kitchen came back, the flickering ceiling light, the table stained with dried coffee rings, the familiar stack of bills sitting next to the microwave. I pictured my mother standing in the middle of the living room, hands fumbling in the darkness, more angry than afraid. They said the account is overdue, she continued, her voice shifting from panic to accusation. You're the one who always handled these things. Why didn't you tell me? I took a deep breath. 1 month earlier, just hearing that tone would have sent me scrambling to apologize, opening my banking app, trying to fix everything before she could get any angrier. But now I just listened, this time. The darkness was no longer on my side of the line. I used to be afraid of this question. Not anymore. Did you pay the electricity bill? I asked. Don't play dumb, she snapped. You know it's still under your name. Why would you let this happen? I opened my eyes and looked at the black screen reflecting my face, tired, but clear. I didn't let anything happen, I said slowly. I just stopped paying for it. Silence. A stretch of emptiness long enough for me to hear her heavy breathing. What do you mean? My mother asked, her voice dropping, mixed with disbelief. I removed my name from the accounts tied to that apartment. I replied, from the moment I moved out. From now on, Whoever's name is on the bill is responsible for it. You're ruining my life, she whispered, then snapped back into anger. After everything I've done for you, I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I'm not doing anything to you, I said. I just stopped being the one who fixes everything. But the power outage wasn't the worst part yet, because I still didn't know there were other things, with my name on them, sitting on the kitchen table. Money isn't always the problem, until it becomes everything. There was a time when the small apartment in Cleveland didn't feel as heavy as it later did. Mornings smelled of cheap coffee. Evenings were filled with the low hum of the television, just loud enough to cover the silence. My father was still there. He didn't talk much, but he always sat at the kitchen table, straightening the bills before I went to bed. My mother was different then. She smiled. She smiled with her eyes. I still remember what it felt like to be asked, "Are you okay today?" No one talked about money as a weapon. It was just numbers, a part of life, not fear yet. Then one morning, my father was no longer sitting at the kitchen table. No long goodbye, just a suitcase that disappeared. After that came the bills. They appeared more often, thicker, placed on the table with a heavy hand. My mother didn't cry in front of me. She just grew quieter. Her voice sank lower, sharper. Now it's just the two of us. That sentence repeated itself, and no one said it out loud. But I began to understand. From here on, everything would be different. My mother no longer asked if I was tired. She asked if I could take extra shifts. The words began to change. "You're smart. You're better than me. You can help me." They sounded like compliments, but slowly, they became requests. Every time money ran short, her eyes changed. Not worry, expectation. I learned to nod before being asked. I learned to apologize for things I hadn't done. Back then, I didn't have a name for that feeling. I only knew this: to keep this house calm, I had to carry the rest, and I did without knowing that it was only the beginning. At that time, I didn't know. I had already started paying a debt. I started working when I was 16 years old. Evening shifts at a convenience store near our old neighborhood. Cold white fluorescent lights, the smell of burnt coffee. The day I received my first paycheck, I held the slip of paper in my hands for a long time, not because the amount was large, but because of the feeling for the first time. I was useful. My mother looked at me differently, no longer worried, reliant. "You're helping support the family now," she said. I nodded. A small pride crept into my chest, warm, but fragile. Not long after, my mother said it would be easier to open a card. "I'll keep it for you, in case you lose it." I remember the pale blue bank envelope. My name printed clearly. My signature at the bottom, my hand shaking, but firm. There were other papers too, contracts, applications. "Just paperwork," my mother said. I didn't read them carefully, not because I was careless, but because I trusted. I trusted that family was a place where you didn't need to be on guard. I trusted that my mother wouldn't put me at risk. Some nights I lay on my bed, staring at the stained ceiling, wondering why I was always the one who had to step up. No one asked directly, no one forced me with words. But if I hesitated for even a moment, the house grew tense. If I questioned anything, my mother's eyes would change. So I learned to stay quiet to make things faster. Sign it. Transfer the money before being reminded. I called that being grown up. Not knowing that, it was when I began disappearing from myself. From then on, money was no longer something to ask about. It was an obligation. Every month, I transferred the money before anyone asked. Every time there was a shortfall, I found a way to cover it. My mother grew used to me handling things. I grew used to staying silent. No one forced me with words, just looks, expectation. I thought I was helping. I didn't realize I was carrying the weight. And in that old apartment, among neatly stacked bills, a habit formed. The habit of paying the price for others, without knowing what I had signed myself into. I had left, but something was still holding me there. I packed in silence. Not the peaceful kind, but a silence stretched tight, like a cord pulled too far. Backpack, a few sets of clothes, laptop, my father's old photo frame. Everything was neat to the point of coldness. Lena opened the door with a look of understanding. She didn't ask much. She didn't offer empty comfort. She simply stepped aside and let me into her small apartment. That night, I lay on the sofa, staring at an unfamiliar ceiling, a different laundry detergent smell, different traffic sounds outside. I told myself I'm fine, but in my head, one sentence kept repeating. It couldn't be this simple. 2 days later, I went back to the old apartment to get the rest of my things. My mother wasn't home. That made me breathe easier, and then feel strangely hollow. The apartment was the same. The kitchen table, the worn chairs, the stack of mail neatly placed, as always. I walked slowly, carefully, as if afraid of disturbing some invisible order. On the table were a few envelopes thicker than usual, stiff paper, pale color, the edges slightly curved, as if they'd been opened and closed again. I didn't plan to look, I really didn't. But my eyes stopped, not because of a red stamp, but because of the name printed in the top left corner. As I stayed in the old apartment longer than I'd intended, the afternoon light slid across the window frame, casting long shadows on the floor. The clock ticked dryly, steadily, to the point of irritation. I touched the edge of the kitchen table. Cold. Everything here was still functioning as if nothing had ever collided. I sorted the envelopes by date. The more I stacked them, the heavier my chest felt. The numbers didn't stand alone. They connected to each other, forming a chain I didn't remember starting. I told myself it could just be a mistake. Maybe old mail. Maybe a system error. But then I realized I was doing the thing I knew best, finding reasons not to face it, and that feeling it was painfully familiar. Just like all the times before, the times I chose silence so things wouldn't get complicated. My name, Hannah Moore. I stood still for a few seconds. Not the kind of shock that explodes, but the sensation of blood draining from my ears. The first envelope, then the second, then the third. The address was this apartment, but the recipient's name was mine. I opened one envelope. The paper inside was thick, the print small, the language dry. Past due, final notice. I swallowed. My heart beat faster than it needed to. I didn't remember signing up for this. I didn't remember agreeing. I didn't remember consenting. But the signature at the bottom of the page looked terrifyingly familiar. I sat down on the chair. Not because I was tired, but because my knees went weak. Everything in the room stayed calm. The wall clock ticking evenly, the refrigerator humming softly, as if nothing had ever been wrong. Only I was different. I stacked the letters again, put them back exactly where they had been. I didn't call my mother, I didn't ask anyone. I just stood there for a long time, listening to a small voice in my head say something had gone too far. And for the first time, I didn't push it away. I picked up one envelope again, light, but heavier than anything I had ever carried. That envelope did not have my mother's name on it. Some truths, once you name them, there is no going back. That night, I didn't sleep, not because I was afraid, but because my mind refused to settle. I opened my laptop and placed the envelopes beside it. Blue light spilled onto the wall, cold and flat. I typed my name into the electric company's website, then the internet provider, then a bank I didn't remember ever doing business with. Account name Hannah Moore. Address the old apartment. There was no system error, no random mistake. Every page that finished loading felt like a heartbeat dropping. Slow, clear, impossible to deny. I spread the documents across the floor, envelopes, bills, contracts. There was one thing I hadn't dared to examine closely: the signature. I took out my driver's license, compared every stroke, every curve. Not identical, but close enough for someone else to believe it was me. A slightly curved letter H, a drawn-out stroke at the end of the last name. I remembered the times my mother handed me papers, just signed quickly. I remembered not reading, not asking, not questioning. Not because I was naive, but because it was my mother. I leaned back in the chair, my hands falling limp. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. There was only an emptiness opening in my chest. If these accounts were real, if that signature wasn't accidental, then what did that mean? I thought about all the times she said, "Let me handle it. You don't need to worry." And for the first time, I didn't look for excuses to defend her. I named the feeling in my head slowly, clearly: betrayal. Not an accident, not ignorance, but a choice repeated many times. I wasn't as angry as I had imagined I would be. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't collapsing. There was only a cold sensation spreading slowly through me the moment you realize the thing you feared most is no longer a hypothesis. All the pieces began to fit. The familiar phrases, the evasions, the papers I had never read. And in that silence, I understood. From this moment on, I would no longer be able to pretend. If this was the truth, then it wasn't a mistake. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for protection. The next morning, I printed everything. Emails, bills, screenshots. I laid them out on Lena's kitchen table, not by emotion, by timeline. The numbers began telling a story of their own. Account openings that matched my work shifts. Transactions made when I wasn't even in the city. No speculation required, just looking straight at it. I clipped each stack of papers together. Neat, cold, the way people prepare for something unavoidable. The legal aid office was on the second floor of an old building. Scratched wooden desks, chairs that creaked when I sat down. The woman across from me wasn't surprised. She only asked, "Did you bring all the documents?" I handed her the file. She read slowly, very slowly. "This isn't a mistake," she said. "This is identity misuse." No raised voice, no judgment, just the truth placed on the table clearer than any accusation. I walked out of the building with a strange feeling. Not lighter, not heavier, just clearer. When things have names, fear is no longer vague. It becomes a to-do list. I realized I didn't need to be right in anyone's eyes. I just needed to stop being wrong to myself. And for the first time, I saw the boundary clearly not drawn with anger, but with decision. On the way home, I didn't call my mother. I didn't draft a message. I opened a new account, changed passwords, cut old links, not out of anger, but out of clarity. For the first time, I understood that protecting yourself does not require explanation. I hadn't confronted her. I hadn't said it out loud. But I had stopped standing in the middle, absorbing the consequences of choices that were never mine. And that was the moment I knew everything was about to change. I hadn't told my mother, but I had stopped shielding her. If you're still listening at this point, comment 1 so I know you're still here with me, so I know you're walking alongside me. When I stopped responding, she began to feel afraid. My phone vibrated close to midnight. My mother's name appeared. I looked at the screen for a few seconds before answering. Her voice wasn't as loud as before. Not sharp, but tight, like she was trying to hold herself together. "Where are you?" I didn't answer right away. I just listened to the breathing on the other end. Faster than usual. "Do you know how many times I've called you?" It wasn't accusation, it was probing. I realized it before she continued for the first time. She wasn't sure she still controlled this conversation. "I just want to know if you're okay." That sentence used to soften me. Now it didn't. She started bringing up old stories, lonely nights, all the sacrifices. "You can't leave your mother at a time like this. Family doesn't do that." Each sentence was wrapped in a victim's tone, no direct blame, just placing the weight exactly where it had always gone on me. I stayed silent, no pushback, no apology. That silence slowed her down, as if she were searching for an old button, but it no longer worked. "Are you listening to me?" "I am," I said, short, enough. No explanation, no promises. On the other end, her tone shifted, softer, then colder. "You've changed." I didn't deny it. I looked at the file folder on the table. The numbers, the dates. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to fix her emotions. I didn't fill the silence. I let the silence do its work. And in that space, I felt something clearly. Power was shifting slowly but irreversibly. I listened to her voice through the phone and realized I was no longer shrinking. Not because I was stronger, but because the truth was standing with me. The folder in front of me didn't need to speak. It just needed to be there, and so did I. And then, she mentioned money. This time, she didn't circle around it. "So what are you going to do about that money?" Her voice changed completely. No more probing, no more victimhood, calculation. I heard the rustle of paper on the other end, as if she were holding a list. "Tuition, rent, money I covered for you before." She listed them slowly, clearly, like a balance sheet. I realized this wasn't a conversation about family. This was a negotiation. And she believed she still had leverage. "If you don't help, I don't know what will happen." Not said outright, just implied. "The landlord isn't very patient. The bills are piling up." Then that familiar line returned, soft, but sharp. "I don't want you to get a bad reputation." I pressed my lips together, looked at the file, the numbers that didn't argue, the signatures that weren't mine. "You just need to transfer the money temporarily," she said. "Just this once." I understood perfectly. Just this once was always the beginning of the next time. "I won't send any money." The sentence landed short, unpadded. On the other end, silence. Then a sharp breath. You're blowing this out of proportion. Family doesn't keep score like this. I'm not keeping score, I replied. I'm stopping. I spoke each word clearly, not raised, not shaking. I'm not a bank, and I'm not a backup plan. I heard her scoff, but it wasn't as certain as before. Because for the first time, she understood. The door had closed, and this time, there was no room left to bargain. I turned off the screen and sat still for a few seconds, not to gather courage, but to confirm that the choice I had just spoken was real. No more negotiation, no more just this once. When money is used as a leash, the only thing I need to do is untie the knot. If you don't help, I'll tell everyone. When the story was told the wrong way, I brought the proof with me. That morning, my phone kept vibrating, not from my mother, from other people. An aunt, a cousin, a distant relative I'd only ever seen at funerals. What you did to your mother is cruel. Family doesn't abandon each other in hard times. The same familiar phrases, copied in the same tone. I didn't need to ask to know who had told the story first. Her version was always the same: an exhausted mother and an ungrateful child. I set my phone down and opened the file folder, not to fight back, but to prepare to tell the truth once and in front of everyone. That afternoon, I received a call from Aunt Karen. Her voice was firm, but not entirely certain. "Come over tonight," she said. "Your mother's here. We need to talk this through." I agreed. No arguing, no explaining over the phone. The house on the west side of Cleveland looked the same as always. Yellow lights, a large wooden table, air that grew heavy when too many people were present. My mother was already seated on the sofa, wearing a thick coat, clutching her handbag tightly, as if she had practiced that posture beforehand. When I walked in, she didn't look at me. She just sighed loud enough for everyone to hear. "She left me at my lowest," my mother said, her voice trembling. "Electric bills, rent, everything fell on me. She knows I can't manage it alone." A few heads turned toward me. Someone nodded. Aunt Karen looked at me. "Is that true?" I nodded. "It's true that I stopped paying." The room stirred. Then I continued slowly, clearly, but not because I walked away, because those expenses aren't mine. I opened the folder, placed each stack of papers on the table. Bills in my name, credit cards I had never opened, dates, signatures. No one spoke. Only the sound of paper passing from one person to another. Aunt Karen frowned. "Cynthia, what is this?" My mother jumped to her feet. "She did this herself and is blaming me." I didn't interrupt. I let her speak. Then I placed the final page on the table. Dispute confirmation emails, credit reports. "I didn't come here to smear anyone," I said. "I just won't accept being blamed anymore." Someone whispered, "Oh my God." My mother fell silent, not out of remorse, but because there was no other story left to tell. "From today," I said, "I won't respond to pressure messages. I won't send money. I won't carry responsibility for someone else." I closed the folder, stood up. No one stopped me. No one spoke right away. But the room had changed. The eyes that had once looked at me with suspicion now flicked toward my mother briefly, quickly, cautiously. Aunt Karen didn't say anything. She just placed the stack of papers back on the table and let out a long breath. Another relative asked quietly, "When did this start?" My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. Not because she felt remorse, but because she was calculating whether there was still a way out. I recognized that moment clearly, not when I spoke, but when others stopped believing her version. The silence no longer stood with her. It stood with the truth. And for the first time in that room, I didn't have to explain. I just had to sit still and let the consequences find where they belonged. 3 days later, my mother's landlord called me. After everything broke open, what remained was not victory. The next morning, I woke up without jolting at my phone. No flooding messages. No interrupted calls. Light slipped through the thin curtains, gentle enough that I didn't need to avoid it. The small rented room was strangely quiet. I made coffee, leaned against the kitchen counter, and listened to the water boil. For the first time in a long while, I didn't need to prepare an answer for anyone. Not because everything was resolved, but because I was no longer standing in the position of having to explain chaos I didn't create. The days that followed moved slowly, but they weren't heavy. I went to work, came back, ate dinner alone. The silence now was different from before. It didn't suffocate. It didn't force me to guess. It had a clear shape, a safe distance. I realized this silence used to be how I endured. Now it was how I protected myself. A few relatives sent messages, Not blaming, just checking in. Is everything better now? Do you need any help? I replied briefly. Polite, no extra details. Not because I was angry, but because I no longer needed to be understood by everyone. There are questions that, if you answer all of them, you slip back into the old role, the one who has to smooth everything over. And I wasn't doing that anymore. I spent one afternoon organizing the documents, not to sue, but to close the chapter. Each paper was placed into a box, labeled, neatly stored in a drawer. Not because I forgot, but because I wasn't letting it stay scattered in my mind anymore. I scheduled a meeting with a financial advisor, filed a credit adjustment request, made plans for the coming months. Very ordinary things. Things I had never had space to do before. One evening, I sat on the bed and opened my father's old photo frame. I didn't cry. I just looked at it for a long time. And I understood this. I didn't leave to punish anyone. I left so I wouldn't keep losing myself. Healing doesn't arrive in one dramatic moment. It arrives when you realize you're no longer shrinking yourself to keep peace for other people. A few weeks later, my life moved at a different rhythm. No climax, no urgent messages. In the mornings, I went to work on time. In the evenings, I returned to my room and cooked something simple. I began to notice small details that never had room before. The sound of cars passing outside, the smell of soap on clean clothes. No one demanded that I fix anything. No one placed their emotions onto me. And I realized this. Peace doesn't come when all problems disappear. It comes when you are no longer pulled into problems that were never yours. Not every story needs a loud ending. This story doesn't end with victory. It ends with a choice. When everything settled, I no longer spent time thinking about who was right or who was wrong. Those questions are exhausting and are no longer necessary. What remains isn't the spotlight, isn't the words that once made me feel small. What remains is the feeling that, for the first time, I don't have to prepare an answer for anyone. Maybe this story isn't about me. Maybe it's about a time you stayed silent to keep the peace. A time you nodded, even though you were already exhausted inside. A relationship that only functions when you are the one carrying everything. We're often taught that endurance is maturity. But if you're always the one swallowing things down, always the one soothing, always the one fixing other people's mistakes, then that's no longer love. That's exhaustion. I used to think boundaries would make me lonely, but it turns out they only bring you back to the right place. A place where you don't need permission to be respected. A place where silence is no longer a void, but space to breathe. Not everyone needs a dramatic turning point. Sometimes, you just need to stop at the right moment. And if this story touched you in any way, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can share more meaningful and valuable life stories with you. See you in the next story.